They also talk about the meritocracy myth. A meritocracy is a society based on merit, that you're put into society and you're placed in society based on your own personal merit. And I put this picture of Bill Gates up here just to illustrate. He's the richest man in the United States, or he was. I think he might have just been passed by Warren Buffett. But he liked to drive fast in his youth, and he was actually arrested by, you can see there, Albuquerque police for having so many speeding tickets that he was actually taken into jail for it. And yet he becomes, the pinnacle of what you can achieve in this society. So I put that up here just to show that maybe our position in society is not always based on what kind of person we are and how much we deserve something. It's based on something else, according to conflict theorists. Maybe it's not personal merit. Maybe it's your ability to exploit business opportunities and sometimes exploit other people. And so it's a myth that we're always put into these positions of power because of our own personal merit, according to conflict theorists. There Bill is today. And also another good argument for this meritocracy myth is, what about people who start at the top and through no great ability or talent of their own become very successful simply because of who their family is? This is Paris Hilton, who I don't think anyone would argue is a great actress or a great singer, but she's making tons of money doing those two things. Would you have ever heard of her if her family wasn't Hilton? If her grandfather hadn't owned didn't own the Hilton hotel chain? In all likelihood, she would not have ever come to this position that she's in now if she'd not been born famous already. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to skip that. I was actually going there with the power elite. And the power elite is this idea that there are certain people at the very top of society who actually control almost all of society. The actual theory of the power elite is that there are top people in the government, the military, and business who simply know one another and influence one another to the degree that you have a very small number of people at the very top of society making most of the decisions for society. And so, when you see things like somebody who holds a top government post in the energy department, then leaving that post to immediately become CEO of a large energy corporation, and then call in all those old favors they got from people who are in the government to pass laws that are favorable to their company, you start to understand that the power elite may not be how our system is supposed to work. Conflict theorists would say that that's how things really work, that there's a very small handful of people at the very top who influence one another and who use their power and their money to make more power and money for themselves and their friends at the rest of the society's expense. That's the idea of the power elite. And then finally, global stratification, which is the picture I show here. Your book goes into this a great deal, so I won't. But it's basically this idea that there are, just as there are rich people and poor people in the United States, that there are rich countries and poor countries throughout the world, and that rich countries like the United States and most of Europe and Japan are exploiting these poor countries for their labor and making goods cheaply and the raw resources that their countries have, and that is causing this system of global stratifications. That's where we get the term third world from, these third world countries that are supplying the first world, the industrialized world, with all of their raw materials and their workforces. Okay, so I wanted just to give you an idea about the degree that we're stratified in the United States. And the best way to do this is to look at the very richest in the U.S. Forbes magazine every year puts out their 400 richest individuals in the United States. So the highest paid as of last year was Bill Gates. I think the new one that just came out is actually, he's been passed by Warren Buffett, but this is as of 2007. The richest man in the United States was Bill Gates. He was worth $59 billion. There's 1,000 million in a billion, so $59 billion. The lowest, if you even want to make it into the 400 richest, you have to be worth at least $1,300,000,000 to even be one of the 400 richest. So this is a pretty exclusive club. And so I thought I'd show it to you graphically. So here's the median income in the United States, meaning the average person pretty much makes around $25,000 per year. Let's compare that to, for example, A-Rod. Alex Rodriguez and his salary with the Yankees, as of his latest salary, he's making about $17 million a year. So you can see, and we all know that sports figures make a lot of money, as do actors and actresses. I could have put one of them up here too. And so compared to the average person, that's a big difference. But now let's go on. Let's compare A-Rod to President George W. Bush. His personal fortune is actually greater than A-Rod, so he's worth more money, eclipsing the median income. But even President Bush's income is tiny compared to Vice President Cheney's income, which is almost $100 million per year. And so Mr. Cheney is, or pardon me, that's his total wealth. So this is a lot of money that Mr. Cheney is actually worth and eclipses the president himself. But compared to the number 400 person on that list of the 400 richest in the United States, even Vice President Cheney's fortune is tiny. So when you start looking at this graphically, you can see these numbers really give you an idea of the difference between the average person and the very richest. And then let's look at graphically the number 1. As you can see, the others hardly even show up when they're compared with Bill Gates's money. The degree of difference is hard to even comprehend how much more money the very richest have in our society than the average person. Another way of looking at this, your book actually has a cool graphic that if you had $500 worth of income represented as a 1-inch child's block, and then you started piling those blocks up on top of each other, that the average person's income would be just over 6 feet tall, or pardon me, 8 feet tall. That pile of blocks would be just taller than the average adult. But if you kept stacking, that if you wanted to get to Bill Gates's yearly wealth figures, that stack of blocks would be higher, much higher than Mount Everest at 29,000 feet. And so just to give you graphically an idea of the differences we're talking about, tremendous differences, tremendous stratification in our society between the average person and the richest. And so this brings us to the idea of social class in the United States. And I'm going to go through these very quickly, but we'll start with the upper class. The upper class is the top 5% of the United States, and most people don't really have a good understanding of what the upper class is, because when we say upper class, what we really mean is upper middle class most times. People like doctors and lawyers, they're not members of the upper class. They're members of the upper middle class. The true upper class, you have to earn at least $185,000 a year. Most people who earn that, though, are not members of the upper class. That's just kind of like a starting figure. I've got some examples of the upper class here. There's Bill Gates on the right, and then President Bush and former Vice President Al Gore, both members of the upper class. But those are two different kinds of members of the upper class, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. The first thing that you need to know, other than how much money they make, is that these people are educated at private Ivy League schools for the most part. You can't go to a public institution like UNC Chapel Hill and expect to be a member of the upper class. They simply just don't go to public schools because those are too cheap. You're going to go to a private Ivy League school, somewhere like Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford, or maybe Duke in North Carolina is one of the few that I can think of, that would be acceptable for upper class children. You also are going to live in exclusive neighborhoods, neighborhoods with gates that you probably never even see as an average person driving by, because these neighborhoods are kept very private.